Welcome, everyone. I'm Roma Dawson, president of League of Women Voters Bay Area, at least until the end of June. My local league is San Jose, Santa Clara. Your incoming president is Kathleen Chaw from Oakland. Our Bay Area councils and conventions are in even years, just like the National League operates. You may be wondering why we didn't ask you to appoint delegates like we normally do. We don't have a business meeting today, and we didn't want to waste your time. Our next 2024 convention is a big one: election of officers, adoption of our 2-year budget, and the results of a 2-year study. You'll hear more about that later from Kathleen. Today, it's all about our guest speaker and listening to all of you. On behalf of the Bay Area Board, we want to especially thank those that attended our meeting during the recent state convention. I had some of you whisper in my ear that you wondered why the Bay Area League exists. We deal with matters that affect more than one county within our 9-county Bay Area. For example, if your local wanted to advocate on a matter before the BART board, you need to talk to us, to LWV Bay Area. For example, if your local wants to advocate on a matter, as I said, before the BART board, that's us. I live in Santa Clara County, where we have the Valley Transportation Authority, and it's only within one county, Santa Clara County. So if I want to advocate, I need to go to our county council. I mentioned this just as an example of the type of input we want all of you during our listening session. Now, that's more than enough from me. Our speaker today is kindly offered to take questions. Please enter your questions into chat. Sherry Thomas and Marianne from our communications team will help me monitor chat, and please limit your comments to 2 minutes. I hope you all read the information we sent out about our speaker today. If you did, then you are as excited as I am to hear his remarks on the core work of the League, the electoral process. Tommy Gong is the Chief Deputy County Clerk-Recorder for Contra Costa County, of course, located right here in our own Bay Area. Completing his 20th year in election administration, he previously served as the elected County Clerk Recorder for San Luis Obispo County and started his career in Stanislaus County. Tommy is an advisory board member for the Elected Official Legal Defense Network, a member of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Task Force on Elections, a board of director for the California Voter Foundation, and served on the executive committee of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials. Earning his BA at the University of California, Berkeley, and an MBA at San Francisco State University, Tommy was one of the first graduates of the California Professional Election Administrator Credential in 2005. And recently he completed the National Certified Election Registration Administrator program called SARA. And that was in 2021, so fairly recently, and a very prestigious thing. Tommy led the effort to form the Coalition of Bay Area Election Officials for neighboring counties to join forces and collaborate on building public trust in elections and shared media markets. Certainly, this is a high priority for every member of League. It covers our 9 Bay Area counties plus 2 more. The coalition earned a very prestigious award called Democracy Award for Best Practice of 2022. This is awarded by the National Association of Election Officials, the Election Center. So it's thrilling to know that someone in work in the Bay Area on elections received this kind of national recognition. And I just can't resist putting in the last part. Amongst Tommy's hobbies is the practicing. Sorry for that little interruption. I'll start again. Amongst Tommy's hobbies is the practicing and teaching of martial arts. His instructor was a student of Bruce Lee, no less. This led to his serving on the board of directors for the Bruce Lee Foundation for many years. His book, Bruce Lee, The Evolution of a Martial Artist, was the culmination of a 5-year project that chronicles Lee's development in the martial arts Tommy just shared with us that it will soon be the 50th anniversary of the death of Bruce Lee. And now, Tommy, please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this very prestigious meeting today. And let me just share, well, first of all, I'm just going to say I'm looking at the names on the screen and it's hearkening back to me. It's so heartwarming to see so many local names from San Luis Obispo on the meeting. It's just, I miss you folks. It's been great. Anyways, I'm here in Contra Costa now. I wanted to share, just by the way, for us local folks here, and let me stop the blur on my background here real quick, that I still have my League of Women Voters Vote poster that was given to me during the last speaking that I did to the local league in San Luis Obispo. And also to show, I'm an elections geek, so I have my Abraham Lincoln ballot back to 1864. And so I used to always show these when I would make a presentation or so. And it will be this ballot is 160 years old. Well, it will be 160 years old as of for next year. And so, and aren't we, where we are in our nation today, as divided as we are now, isn't this, a earmark for, what's to come for our nation in the future? But thanks again for having me. Yes, a lot has happened with me over the last couple of years, and that did lead to, someone asking me to write that letter for the Senate Judiciary Committee. Certainly I had, I guess I should summarize that in the 2020 election was one of the most challenging elections for election officials across the nation. And it really showed during the primary election cycle for many states across the nation. California was one of the earlier states. We had our election in March. And so it was only like the next week that COVID was declared, like a pandemic, a real emergency situation for the country, but not until then. So we were able to get through the election, but then we were seeing what was happening in the other states who had later primaries, like Wisconsin or Georgia and such. And so really California was really concerned about what do we need to do to make changes in order to make it safe for the voters, for the poll workers, and for the election workers in the office. And so we had a lot of changes to accommodate the governor. We were meeting weekly with the Secretary of State's office to talk about what are we going to do to make it safe for everyone. And so, the governor, at the end of the day, the governor declared, I believe it was in late May or early June of that year, that we're going to be, counties are going to send a ballot to every registered voter. And then that counties would have the opportunity, instead of polling places, that they could more heavily consolidate and have like a vote center operation at in their respective counties. And that's what we opted to do in San Luis Obispo. In order to do that, we had to have all kinds of equipment on order to be able to make this change. Typically, when you see a county make a change like this would happen over about at least a year process to plan through all of the locations you're going to have. They have to be larger locations, so that way voters could spread apart. You have to have the requisite equipment, the telecommunication technology there. And we accomplished it in 3 months' time. So when I think about all of the things that we had to do, all of the backup plans that we had to have generators. Generators were in high demand around the world. And I had someone that was helping us be able to ensure that we could get 5 generators for backup plans. And we pulled it off. And in fact, we had the highest turnout the county had ever seen. In fact, we had one of the highest turnouts for statewide compared to the other 57 counties, for example. And so it was really a huge accomplishment. One of the major things that we did is because we knew that there were going to be so many changes to the election that we needed to really ramp up our voter education and outreach program. And so I really embraced the media in that case, because I knew that I had to let them know that voters, you're going to automatically receive a ballot in the mail. And instead of our traditional polling places, we're going to have vote centers for you to go to. And so I was very proactive on that. And I think that that led to the turnout that we had as a result. And, but then after the election, after we completed it, and again, it was wildly successful. And even after January 6th, there was some inquiries from some folks in the county requesting for this forensic audit. And it was the first time we had ever heard of this term. We didn't know exactly what that meant. But once they explained what their request entailed, there was no way that I could allow for that to happen because it would be against the law. When you, after your election is completed, you are to retain all of your election materials, and they are to be, be sealed up, and they are to remain unopened unless a court determined to do so. So you'd be breaking the law to open up all of your election materials that way. But these folks were not happy with that answer, and they really kind of created a campaign, so to speak, to really put the pressure on to convince me to do otherwise. And but I decided not to, and I held by my convictions in terms of the election is certified and the integrity was in place. Anyhow, in so doing, I find myself, shortly after in Contra Costa County, and when this Senate Judiciary Committee was coming together, and they were concerned about election officials' safety and what election officials are going through. One person asked me to write a letter to the judiciary about it. And so I thought, it was about a year later, and it gave me some time to reflect on it. And so that's what I wrote, and that's in that link that you can all access. I also advocated for some things, for some real needy things for the profession now too, such as adequate funding, for example, for election offices, and also the need for voter education and outreach, especially in today's time as we're dealing with the mis and disinformation. And so feel free to read that if you haven't done so already. And if you do raise it, if you were able to read it and you have some questions, I'm happy to answer those. One thing that I am in such an envious position now is that I operate in a much larger jurisdiction. We have 700,000 registered voters in Contra Costa County. In San Luis Obispo, at our height, we were at 175,000. Typically, 160,000 is where we were at. So I'm in a much larger jurisdiction. And as a result, I have many more staff who can, to divvy up the work. That gives me a lot more opportunity to think outside of the box. That gives me opportunity to see what's happening in the industry and in the profession, not only within California, but in other states. I've been interfacing with a lot more election officials from other states, including Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. I had opportunity to meet Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, for example. And it's just amazing to see the level of dedication that there are at all levels of elections, whether it's the Secretary of State or a chief state elections official down to a registrar, even the staff members, the level of dedication that election workers perform and are committed to in terms of conducting elections. So in so doing, I've been just much more active on a national level and doing things like speaking to congressmen about our needs and things like that. I just recently, and it's going to come to, it's going to be released in about a week, but there's the Election Center is a national association of election officials, been around for, I think, about 30 years. And they have a journal of election administration, research, and practice. And so I actually wrote up something because we won the award from them last year. So I wrote up a journal entry for them, and that will be out very soon. And I think it would be worthwhile to take a look at. And there were some things that I made note in there that brings it more to heart in terms of how election officials need to look at our industry today versus 20 years ago when I started, for example. Now we have to put this all into frame, into some perspective. I started in elections in 2003. So the 2000 election, presidential election, was pretty fresh in everyone's mind. And as a result, the Help America Vote Act was signed into law by President Bush at the time. And that was the first time that there was some real sweeping legislation, federal legislation, that was to be adhered to across the nation. And that was the first time there was actually money provided to jurisdictions for new voting equipment, because a lot of people were using the punch cards like they were in 2000. So there was a big push for counties to upgrade their voting system. There was also a call for every state to establish a statewide voter registration database, which everyone has done now. In fact, in some states, they have already gone on to version 2 of a statewide database. I think Georgia is one of them. And so it's quite fascinating to see how elections in the last 20 years, where were we at, after the 2000 election, and where are we at today? And I can just say, number one, that there has been some vast improvements made to elections that election officials have not done a very good job of advocating for, of publicizing the improvements that have been made over the last 20 years. And it's incumbent upon election officials to do that. But part of the challenge is this. I'd like to say that in the not too distant past, that a successful election was one where you never made the news. Because if you made the news, it was bad news, right? And so election officials, because of that, always tended to kind of shun the media. They never really embraced the media. And so they would always, just try to fly under the radar, conducting their election, praying that they don't make any mistakes, and then, hopefully skate by. But if you make a mistake, then it is going to be in the news, and it's going to be bad news. And so that has always been I grew up on that, when I first started, and always kind of operated in that fashion. But one thing I recognize is during 2020, the media in San Luis Obispo was very much embraced us. They realized that there were some big changes that were happening because of the COVID pandemic. And so they wanted to give us as much airtime to be able to talk about the changes and all of that. So in that way, it was very fruitful. But I will admit that the job of media in a lot of ways is to be the watchdog, the government watchdog, right? To be sure that, elected officials and government workers are, being held to, the standard that they set, and that they're performing as they're supposed to be. And so it does create this tension between the media and election officials and government officials, but election officials especially, because generally we are underfunded. We don't have a public information officer, someone specifically assigned to working with the media. In some cases, the registrar or the clerk-recorder is the sole media person, right? And although I just saw in San Luis Obispo, they're getting approved a public information officer now. So kudos to San Luis Obispo for making that change. So I'm still watching the news down there. No, a little bit. But that's where the need is because now, especially as we're dealing with the mis and disinformation, there is a need for being able to advocate. Now, what I did notice after 2021 and all of the mis and disinformation and all of the people who, questioned the 2020 election, that I've noticed that the media is giving election officials more or less partnering now with election offices and giving us the ability to explain the processes and procedures that we do that contribute to the integrity of election. And so that's a really powerful partnership now that I think can go a long way in that way. But today, nonetheless, our society is that much more polarized as we see today. And that goes along with the media, that the media now, instead of dealing with our network news only, we have all these cable news networks that kind of cater to, to conservative views versus more liberal views. And so those who are watching are only they're only watching that particular news channel, for example, and they're only getting half of the story. And that's part of the issue, one of the challenges that we're dealing with today. And another issue is voter knowledge of elections, as I kind of alluded to. As we've done in Contra Costa, one of the things that we started up was what we call a certified election official program, our CEO program. And what we do with that is we have people who will come into our office, not for one day of observation, but actually up to 5 days of coming to our office during key moments as we're conducting the election. We want them to see the logic and accuracy test that we do to our voting system before we even count our first ballot. We want them to see the signature comparison that we do to the vote by mail ballots before we are allowed to begin opening them, preparing them for counting, and then actually putting them through the counter. We want them to see the audits that we perform during the canvass of the vote after election day, so that they can see the checks and balances that we have, that we conduct during the election. And so those people who have come, and there have been quite a few local league members who have joined the program, is very educational. It's really a insider's view of all of the things that we do during elections. And so even for some of the members, it was like, I thought I knew what you did during elections, but what you showed me was even much more comprehensive of all the various things that we do. And so I think in some ways we need to publicize that even more, and to educate the public through the media, like what happens to your vote by mail ballot once you put it in the mailbox or once you put it into the drop box. What happens on election night, as you're counting ballots, or after you've voted at a polling place. How do I know that my vote counted, for example? What are the things that we do with the voting system to ensure that the machine is counting properly? So these are some major things that we're starting to realize that's a real challenge to let the public know. The last thing is decentralization. The election, by its very nature across the nation, is highly decentralized. Every state has its own set of election laws and codes in terms of how their election is to be conducted. And whereas in California, it's been a pretty stable operation, meaning the election codes don't change so drastically. In other states, they can change quite drastically. They could be like with voter ID laws, you could have voter ID laws implemented like a month before election day. There's just some really daunting things that can happen in other states, but that leads to more mistrust of the process, that if a news station picks up on something happening in Georgia, for example, then that makes its way through social media into California, and that makes people in California think that these are the things that are happening in California. So that's where there's just this divide and conquer thing that's happening to the industry right now. I don't have an answer to that. I have a pipe dream that we can have a little more uniformity across the nation, but I'm not sure if we'll ever get there with the way that the laws are, since the laws are being created and modified by the state legislature. It's all at the mercy of the state legislature. I know that there are efforts that are being made that will advocate for best practices in elections, and hopefully that can have an effect on it from a national standpoint. But those are things that we'll have to see how that develops down the road. So once I landed in Contra Costa, I will say, when I first moved here, I was wake up early in the morning. I'm trying to decide what news station am I going to watch the early news. And, there's a bunch of them out here, right? And so I'm going through them, and I'm just kind of, watching them all and trying to decide. But one thing I realized is, regardless of what station you watch, it covered the whole entire Bay Area, all the way, sometimes Santa Cruz would even be covered from time to time, but Santa Clara, Alameda, San Francisco, Contra Costa, even Solano, and then up along the coast with Marin, Napa, in Sonoma, for example. And so that's when I had the idea, why don't we try to work together, the neighboring counties, to work together, and let's be more unified and uniform in our response. In fact, let's work together, and maybe we can actually advocate together for, you know, what we do in terms of our profession, to build public trust in elections. And so we did get all but one county to agree to join, and we started to build like fact sheets, like what happens to your vote by mail ballot, what's up with voting systems. At the time, redistricting had just finished, so we wanted voters to understand that you might have been redistricted into a different district. You might not be voting on the same candidates as you had been in the past. And we also really it was rather aggressive with news, for example. So I was so that I would knock on the doors of the TV news stations. You know, I'd give them a call or email the news director and say, hey, you know, we have this news segment we'd like to do a month before the election when ballots go out, the weekend before the election, to let voters know that there's still a chance to vote, and to answer any questions so that people would understand what we do in order to build that trust back into the election process. And so the media wasn't quite prepared for that, because generally the election person doesn't usually knock on their door. They're knocking on your door. And so they were surprised, and they kind of took us up on the offer. So I was on KTVU, I was on KRON 4 on a weekend segment. We invited all of the media to come to our elections office on election night. KTVU was live. They were there. In fact, they were here since 5 p.m. and they wanted to say, well, how's the election day going? First of all, 5 o'clock is still not too late. You can still go out there and vote. And then after 8 o'clock, then they went through and they followed us, you know, the ballots that were coming in from the polling place, and then following the cart that goes upstairs to our tabulation room. And then they parked themselves in the tabulation room to see the ballots being counted. And then I took them to the warehouse to show all the other supplies that were coming back from the polling place. So it was really like a insider's view of things that were happening on election night, and even follow-up and all. And so it was just really a worthwhile endeavor for them. And so it really worked out well. And so now what I'd like to do is share a little bit more about this. I'm going to share my screen with a slideshow. And you should be able to all see that now. And so we call it the Coalition of Bay Area Election Officials. And that shows kind of our area of the state that we all belong to generally. And so we recognize that, you know, traditionally voter education and outreach always had to do with voter registration and the deadlines, and be sure that you vote to get off the vote. And like I said, you know, a successful election was one where you never made the news. But now we recognize that since 2020, we have to address mis and disinformation to the public. We need to even be more transparent for the public to have a trust. And we need to educate the public on these processes that we do to be able to develop that trust. It includes these counties here. And you may ask, like, why does it include like Monterey, San Benito, and Santa Cruz? And the reason why we included this set is the way our state association of election officials is comprised. I think there's 5 areas, and the Bay Area is comprised of these counties, including Monterey, San Benito, and Santa Cruz. So we invited them if they wanted to join, even though we realized they may not share the same media market as us, but they wanted to glean from the exercises that we did to develop our talking points and things like that. So they wanted to be included nonetheless. So we recognize that we shared a media market, and there's only really, you know, even print news has started to consolidate, right? So like the Bay Area News Group, they have both the Mercury News and the East Bay Times under their control. And they even have the Marin Independent Journal is a community newspaper that they print for example. So it's quite, the news has really kind of consolidated. So it gave us the opportunity to work together and combine our efforts. So 11 counties, I said, but our mission statement is ensuring public trust in elections by collaborating, communicating, and providing access to accurate, current, and transparent election information across the Bay Area. We also say there on a sidebar, we also commiserate together as well. Just joking. Okay, adding up the numbers of voters between the 11 counties, we realized we comprise 4.3 million voters. So, I mean, it gave us even greater that we feel that our efforts to pay off that much more because we're serving that many voters in combination with our efforts. So it helped us really to be able to say, hey, we're really involved in a big thing here. And so we started by working through with weekly Zoom meetings, talking about what are the things that we want to educate the public about, and being able to do that. We started that in January of 2021 in preparation for the June primary election. And so these are the things that we did. We developed key messaging for and establishing that election officials are your trusted source of election information. Come to your election official for any questions. And one of the members realized as Bay Area elections that the acronym would be BAY. And for you, I will say the earlier generation of social media users, BAY also means like before anyone else, like your significant other. So we realized, oh, we need to play on that. So we said, we say from time to time, we're your BAY. And for, when it comes to elections, so before anyone else, come to us with your questions about elections before anyone else. And so we identified the topics that we wanted to cover: redistricting, vote by mail voting systems and the security built around them, in-person voting options, and the canvas, such as like, why does it take so long for election officials in California to certify their election? We launched our website, which I know was a link available in the intro information. Created a Facebook, even a TikTok video at Santa Clara. Santa Clara is so creative. They're our big sister of our contingent. And so they were able to embrace TikTok. And I have one at the end to show you. And it's great because what Santa Clara County does is they utilize interns from San Jose State University who might be, doing things with social media. They're trying to break it into Facebook, for example. So they utilize interns from there to think really creative stuff. It's really great to see. We're doing the same with Diablo Valley College now, after learning what Santa Clara is doing. We would put out press releases. We would create a press release, include the fact sheet with it about a particular topic, and then our strategy was to release it simultaneously to all of our contacts. So therefore, the Chronicle might be receiving the same press release from Alameda County, Santa Clara, San Mateo, Contra Costa, and they're like, wait, something's up here. What's going on? And then we had a list of all the contacts of the counties, so they could pick what county they wanted to contact to follow up on, hey, what's this that you guys are talking about? So, we'll make a news story about it. So that was a strategy that we did in terms of really trying to get it out there. And it would be, a news source might get it from multiple sources. And then it kind of raises, hopefully, a red flag, like, hey, we should really look into this, was our strategy. And then we created a few educational videos. And then, as I mentioned, the media interviews that we were moving on there. We also created a code of ethics that we thought was really important for us to do, especially in light of, some of the instances, election officials have to be held to a very high standard. And if you have some insider stuff that's happening, such as what was happening in Colorado, for example, we have to hold ourselves to a high standard in our profession. And so we created this, and, the first two paragraphs just really are so powerful. Let me just recite it. We believe in freedom is an inherent human right. Freedom is fragile in nature, best maintained and nurtured through the democratic process. The success of the democratic process requires fair and open elections, which accurately reflect the intent of the electorate. As election officials, we are entrusted with a responsibility to protect and promote public trust and confidence by conducting accurate, fair, and transparent elections. To reach this goal, we must be guided by an ethical, nonpartisan, law-abiding principles, and through a dedicated adherence to the code of ethics and standards of conduct, we demonstrate our pledge to freedom, our pride in our profession, and a commitment to the democratic process. And I just thought that that was such powerful words. I did not create this. I won't take the credit for it. It was work done by the combination of counties to come up with this code of ethics. And I was just like, once they presented it to us, the working group presented it to us, we just thought it was so, awesome for us to ascribe to this code of ethics. And it is something that I'm floating around nationally, showing other organizations that others in the profession should also adhere to something like this as well. They should establish something. So just another thing that I'm just really proud of that the coalition did. And all 11 counties signed on to this. It was something that we made a press release about, and it was showing like our dedication to the profession and what we are committed to as we're conducting elections. So something I'm very proud of. Lessons learned. So it was quite fascinating, for example, that in this contingent, we have a mixture of elected clerk recorders and appointed registrars of voters. And the power structure in each respective county can be quite different. So for example, an elected clerk recorder typically can call their own shots. They can put out a press release, no problem. But sometimes you'll have an appointed registrar who has to have it approved by, let's say, the county PIO or by the county chief administrative officer, for example, before they can release it. So those are some things that we realized how we're working along different power structures according to counties there. Different needs for different counties, and one size does not fit all. What Santa Clara does is maybe not what Napa County needs. And we have vote centers today versus traditional polling places. So like Contra Costa is a polling place operation, Solano is a polling place operation, Monterey is a polling place operation, but many of the 11 counties are vote centers. So we tried to find a way that we could both benefit from our messaging without messing up one or another operation too much. Most counties had little to no budget for outreach and education. That goes without saying. We did notice smaller counties can greatly benefit from larger counties' efforts. So I remember the gentleman from Napa County would say, look, I don't have the bandwidth to spend all the time on creating messaging and this and that, but, have the team, have a subcommittee create stuff and, stuff that we'll all agree to. And, that helps us little counties out because, I just don't have the bandwidth to do it. So this is showing where a collaboration like that can be really worthwhile for the smaller counties. And that's something I would have recognized in San Luis Obispo, for example. Like I said, it gives us a chance to collaborate, coordinate, and commiserate between colleagues. We have a platform for learning from one another. Just by meeting once a week, it gave us a chance like, hey, I have this ballot designation being proposed, by a candidate. Would that be something you would, accept or not? Things like that. We're talking shop. How are you handling, vote by mail ballots, with your signature comparison, for example? What processes do you do? So what really gives us a forum to be able to float ideas and best practices and all. And but I will say the challenge during that primary election was there was little media interest at the time until very close to the election. We wanted to start out 8 weeks in advance. The media was not interested. We put out our first press release. It was crickets. Nobody called. Nobody was interested. It wasn't until about 5 weeks before the election that they started to follow up on our press releases. So after talking to more of them, I realized that's our window of time, is that maybe 5 weeks before the election to about 2 weeks after the election, that's our spotlight time. And so it's like learning the media cycle. We're competing with a lot of other interests in the community. So when are they really going to pay attention to us? It's when the election is happening, of course. So as we say, 2020, the reason why we really made a lot of effort in 2022 was because that was just our rehearsal, because we knew that 2024 is going to be that much more of a challenge. And so we're, considering, like, is this something we could do statewide? Could we maybe work with the Secretary of State, for example? We do recognize that in today's world, we have to simplify our message even more so for the public. And so we're still trying to figure that out. Break it up into even more bite-sized chunks, for example. How could we go about doing that while we're still demystifying the election process? I want to be sure, again, to be trustworthy, share fact sheets, let the public know what it is that we're doing, partnering more with Department of Homeland Security right now, for example. Security is at the top of a lot of discussions right now. And then one thing we recognize through some of my work right now is that engaging with civil society is I think something that the election profession needs. Could be something that really works out with League of Women Voter chapters, for example. But what we're recognizing is we need to engage with corporations, business leaders, faith leaders, even schools, to start building those life skills and those understandings about what we do as elections, but what we do as a society. And we need to have this sense of fair play. I think that has kind of gone by the wayside as civil society maybe isn't, having the time to be able to talk about the fairness of a game, a baseball game, fairness of a basketball game, fairness of our elections, for example, are things that we need to start instilling in our society. So as a result, yes, I'd like to say that we submitted this practice to the Election Center. It's a national organization. In fact, now I'm on the committee to review the submissions for this year. And let me just say, for them to select us as the best practice of the year, it's so competitive now that I've seen the other, submissions, that I feel we were so fortunate to receive this award, to be recognized that this is something that's really new, that the industry wants to encourage for more counties to speak to one another, neighboring counties. Many states don't, for example. And so very, very proud that we were able to do that. Lastly is, like I said, as I promised, and I hope you can hear this, I'm going to give it a shot. So we put together this TikTok video, and one thing I keep, it was humming in my mind all the time, Stevie Wonder's song, Sign, Seal, Deliver. And so I kept harping to him that we need to use this song somehow, so that will, inspire the voters to be sure you sign, you seal it, and you deliver your ballot, for the election. So I'm going to play that, and hopefully you can hear it. Oops, it stopped. Hold on. So anyways, we were quite proud of that TikTok, and Santa Clara was telling us, so they had to get me in there since I was making a big deal about it. So they got me in at the very end with my straw hat. And it turned out that that was their most popular video of the election cycle. So it was just so fun. And that's the thing, is it's brought back kind of a joy of conducting elections in a way back to me. I have to admit that, you know, when I loved working in San Luis Obispo, I have to say, but I was recognizing it in myself. It wasn't going to be sustainable. I was working in such a small office. My nose was to the grindstone every day. And it was like, you know, I never had a chance to kind of, you know, look up and smell the roses and that sort of thing. And here in Contra Costa, I'm giving that opportunity. But I was saying to myself, like, am I ready for retirement already? Oh, no, wait a minute. My boys aren't even in college yet, you know? And so it's like, wait a minute, I need to like really think about this. And so it kind of like brought a new life for me right now at my stage in my career. It's just like all fitted really well for me. And so, so thank you.
Tommy, I have to say right now that we are so grateful to have you in the Bay Area. We are so grateful for what you've done in terms of voter education. And I can say right now, I hope you will view going forward that League of Women Voters Bay Area wants to partner with you. We have Sherry, our communications director, is you know, helping behind the scenes. You met her earlier. And we are absolutely dedicated to helping you get the word out. And it particularly intrigued me when you said local leagues could help with that spotlight on the actual education process. And I want to make sure, lest anyone think this was my brilliant idea or others on the board from Santa Clara County, I need to give a big shout out to Marin County. And I must say, I did not know the coalition existed. And I can't believe I didn't know that. And I am so grateful to Marin. That's the value of all of us, again, coming together, sharing our stories and talking to each other. And now we're going to just blow up our agenda. And since we don't have a business meeting or any official votes, I'm going to take some questions. And Tommy, you need to let me know when you need to leave. And we'll go through as many questions as you have time for. And let me go back and get to the beginning of chat here. And I need to recognize our very brand new board member, Louise. So I'm going to ask her question first here. Would you support requiring all counties in California to use an electronic voting system or to use electronic voting systems? And of course, she mentioned Shasta County and their desire to move to a hand count. So if you'd comment on that.
Wow, let me just say it's I know Kathy. Yeah, it's funny. Kathy Darling and I started in elections at the same time. We both started in 2003, and we serve on the board of the California Voter Foundation. So we've been having a lot more conversations and going through, you know, what she's going through right now, and not only that, but the process that has to take place if you're going to hand count ballots. So first of all, she already started to work through a procedure of what it would take in order to hand count ballots. And then the Secretary of State had to chime in with their use procedures, or what do they call it, regulations with hand counting ballots. So some of them, it's quite interesting. Some of them are very, very prescriptive in terms of how the hand counting process is to take place with your tally sheets and all. Other areas are kind of wide open and up to the election official to determine. But when I last spoke to her, you know, now you got to think about this size and scale. Shasta County has about 100,000 registered voters, if I understand correctly. They might be counting between 60 and 80,000 ballots, you know, 80,000 ballots during a presidential general election. So you have to think about it in terms of sheer volume when you're counting that many ballots. There are notions, from what I understand, there are some jurisdictions in the US that count ballots by hand, but they're like really small jurisdictions, like under 1,000 registered voters, for example. So in a case like that, you can make it work. But how do you scale it up to where you're counting, you know, 50,000 ballots, for example? And that's where it gets really daunting of what it's going to take. In her estimation, I think she's saying she needs another, I believe it's $1 million or 1.5 million additional dollars just for hand counting ballots, for the sheer number of people that you're going to need to have on hand in a large, facility like a gymnasium, to the actual process itself. So, people, they talk about, oh, I know that it's done in the UK or it's done in some other country, France maybe, where they're voting for their president, for example. But that's like the only contest that's on the ballot is simply the presidential race, not all the other, state legislative seats and city mayor and school district and all, only the presidential race. And even with that, I think the ballots are counted at the polling place, for example, and then the results are being, reported in. So now you have a whole division of labor that way. But in today's world in California, we're dealing with 90% of our voters are voting vote by mail. So now you're doing everything in bulk. And now you have all those contests to do. So here's an example. It really, as we were going through it step by step, you're going to have tally sheets. You're going to have a tally sheet, and you can only count 25 ballots at a time. Only 25 out of your 80,000 ballots, 25 in a batch. And you're going to have a tally sheet that's going to, hash mark for candidate A or B, overvote, undervote. And then they thought, well, what about all the other contests? Well, you need another set of tally sheets for that contest. And that contest, for those 25 ballots, if you have 20 contests on that ballot, you can have 20 tabulation sheets that come along with it. The other thing I realized, I was trying to figure out, I'm trying to go through my head. How is this all going to work out, right? So I'm going through it in my head, step by step with her. And I said, okay, so we're going to have those tally sheets. Somehow those tally sheets are going to have a batch number on it because, we want to make sure that you're not having duplicate batch numbers and all. And then you're going to plug it into like a spreadsheet, right? Oh, no. No spreadsheets are allowed. In fact, no calculators are allowed to add up all of the tally sheets. So right now, that's the way it's written, right? There's talk about, apparently there is an open source calculator that might be certified for use, but no commercially available calculator, no electronics, okay? So it's down to that level of supposedly trying to make it work. So it just shows how daunting it is, if not impossible, for a county, Shasta County size. Now, they're looking at possibly having an election in November, and it might contain only one ballot, one contest, maybe two contests. But that's much more manageable, because now you're only looking at yeses and nos, for example, or a candidate A and candidate B, but you're only looking at that one or two races versus, what our ballots look like today. So what she's concerned about is they're going to have this November election. It's going to fly by because it's only one contest. And the county's going to think, no problem. We're going to be able to do, the presidential primary in the same way without thinking about, we're going to have party ballots, right? We're going to have a whole slew of contests on the ballot. So, it's not going to really, it's going to set up a false narrative that, oh yeah, you're going to have no problem to be able to succeed with hand counting ballots.
I'm going to move to another question, and this is from Amanda, and I believe Amanda's with public radio in Central Coast area. And of course, she is asking you to share a little bit more about your experiences as the clerk-recorder in SLO County during 2020. And I think we're really all interested in the next part of her question, which is, what were some of the specific challenges that you faced at that time? In other words, what really drove you up the wall?
Well, I guess the most challenging thing is that you can explain all of your processes. You can explain the certification process that the voting system goes through. You can explain that you have the paper ballots, that still is the paper trail and has all of the, marked ballots that, could be recounted if that be the case. That wasn't what the request was. But so it was like no amount of explanation was sufficient. to answer their questions. It's still through a doubt in the system. And I don't know what the nexus of the doubt is, other than that it's being spoon-fed to them in some way that it's convinced them. And that's the most frustrating piece, is that it didn't seem like no matter what you said, what you showed, and all of that, even they observed, the process during 2020, that it didn't seem like you could convince them. There was no way that you could convince them otherwise. So you need to have people that are open-minded, honestly open-minded, to be able to, make a judgment for themselves. And that's why I think it is a big problem today with the way, I get back to the way the media is today, right? If people are only watching one news source and they're not covering all the news, then that's problematic in today's time. And, and people, as I'm finding out, they're profiting from the mis and disinformation. It's so crazy to understand that, that's what part of our social media world is contributing to. People are actually making money because they're putting out an ad or something, they get hits on it, they get paid for this mis and disinformation. So these are the things that is the nature of our industry right now that we need to do something about. But that was probably the most frustrating thing, is that no matter what, that, they were, just already made up their mind without having a chance to be able to explain really what's going on.
Thank you. And folks, I'm going to keep rolling a little while with a few more questions, because there's just some fascinating questions here. Share your thoughts on voting with traditional polling precincts versus the BCA regional vote centers. And again, this is just talking about all aspects of it, budget, planning, etc. Yeah.
So I will say both models are good. We need to be clear about that. There isn't one, I won't say that there's one model that's better or worse than the other. Both of them, I think, are effectively serving voters in their respective counties. Contra Costa, we've decided to stick to polling places right now, and there's multiple reasons for that. But I guess you can say, I was, even in San Luis Obispo, I was seriously looking at, implementing vote centers to replace our polling places before. And we took a real deep dive on it, looking at, what it would take and then the costs involved. And, it was always kind of insinuated that you would save on cost because you'd have fewer polling places, right? Of course, you're sending out a ballot to every voter, but you would be able to save on the number of polling places and the poll workers that you would have. But at the end of the day, when you went through the Voters' Choice Act requirements, you have to open a certain number of vote centers as early as 11 days before the election. And that's stipulated at 1 per 50,000 registered voters. So we'd have to have 35 locations open 11 days before the election. What we've heard from the other counties that have already done this is that first week, from 11 days to 4 days before, that first 7 days, hardly any voters go to that location. Yet you still have to have those 35 locations open, and you have to pay these people now, instead of a poll worker stipend as they work on election day, now you have to hire them on as temporary election workers, and you have to pay them an hourly rate, a competitive hourly rate. And so when we were doing the math on this, we realized our salaries or so for temporary help was going through the roof, while we were saving on the number of locations, but our salaries were going to go much more. And we were looking at maybe a 40% increase in the overall cost of the election because of that very nature. I think the 4 days of voting, meaning all your vote centers open for 4 days, I think it is a nice compromise. But still, the state will not move on this 11-day period where the counties are all showing like hardly any voters going there. So it seems like it's kind of wasteful and a little bit of overkill. And you always see that the heaviest day of even vote centers is election day, of course, because that's when people are going to go. And they might go for convenience earlier, but most of them are going to go on election day. Contra Costa, part of the challenge is that we are so geographically diverse that it really helps us to be able to really concentrate on election day, which is when most of the voters go, as I said, to have a really, our 150 locations that voters can go to. And we recognize, like, we're trying to do more data crunching on this to see the communities that are where more voters are voting in person versus by mail. And so we're really trying to approach it scientifically that way too. But that's what we've recognized, is that the costs involved are astronomical by comparison. The other thing is that now all counties are required to send a ballot to registered voters, right? Compared to when vote centers first started. So it's kind of leveled out the playing field so that, now we're seeing 90% of our voters, sometimes 95% of our voters voting by mail. And so just having that concentrated election day where we serve our voters in Contra Costa, that's part of the reasoning process that we're sticking to polling places. But vote centers are just as viable, just the same.
Thanks. And I think you touched on an issue in Santa Clara, that's important in parts of San Jose in particular. Tommy, do you have any thoughts about how we can deal with disinformation that is intentionally spread by one candidate about another? And this individual, Janet, is mentioning specifically a San Ramon school board race, but this could certainly happen. Again, we're nonpartisan as the league. You are nonpartisan in your function. How do we approach this sensitive area?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Because we really don't, as election officials, we conduct the election and we don't really get involved in, what the candidates do, outside of the process of the election. But I would say that I know that, like, number one, there is a code of conduct that we float to the candidates when they file as candidates. What is it called? Code of Fair Campaigning. It is not campaign practices. And that's saying that, they're going to be above board with their campaign and all. And they file that with the all election offices do this. And so sometimes the media may contact us and say, hey, did this candidate fill this out, for example? Most of the time, the candidates do. And so if they did fill that out, sometimes the media might cross-examine the candidate, say, hey, you signed this, and aren't you going against the pledge that you're making, by signing this, this document that you did with the elections office? It doesn't hold any teeth. There isn't anything you can take them, to court with. But those are the types of things that we don't really get involved with in that case. Other than that, we put their name on the ballot, we check their ballot designation, and and it's unfortunate, but it's one of those things that, you could take it to the Fair Campaign Practices Commission, for example. But at the same time, and I'm not a campaigner or anything, but sometimes there is a power to social media, and if you do have a following that can drown that messaging out or address that messaging, sometimes that's how you have to take it, into your own hands, meaning, the other candidate, for example, to combat that. Sometimes the candidate may want to go to the media with that, for example, right? So those are all things that, a candidate may want to consider.
Thank you. And we have several questions that relate to misinformation and disinformation. And rather than go into too much of that right now, we have some outreach tools that we use at League Bay Area, monitor notes, board briefs, some other things like that. We'd like to invite you to write a guest column for us, and maybe misinformation, disinformation, whatever topic you think, but we would love to either have you write a column geared to us, or if you just would like us to reprint something you think is particularly valuable, we would love to do that on your behalf. And I'm just going to ask you this one intriguing question, and I'm afraid I'm really going to have to cut it off. Well, all right, I'm going to ask two more. Do you have any thoughts on, there's a movement now to have a student vote for example, on school board elections, and the intriguing idea of exactly what is an appropriate age for voting. Could you just take a few minutes and give us your thoughts on that, since we may be all engaged in that dialogue in our own counties?
Yes, exactly. So I would say, from an election official standpoint, so one thing is, we follow the law, right? So if the law presented itself that, people that are under 18 should be allowed to vote, it becomes a little bit of a programming challenge for us. And that would mean, like our voter registration system is hard-coded so that if you're not 18, you're not eligible to vote. And we have the pre-registration, and that's why the programming is there that way. So it would take programming, some additional programming to say, okay, we're going to look at 16-year-olds only for the school board race. If it's only the school board, a school district's race only versus all of the other contests. And that's where you have to divide and conquer that. So for instance, like I know there was the piece in San Francisco where they would allow non-citizens to vote on their school board elections. And so I was really interested to see how that operates. And so the way I understand it in talking with a few of them is that they have a separate registration database for the non-citizens, of which then they print a roster that has a list of those non-citizens for that particular precinct, for example. And then they have a specific ballot that they vote on that only has it for that school board race. So there's, that's the only thing they're eligible to vote on. So, there are some logistical things that have to take place in order to make that happen. I think a 16 and a 17-year-old is a little bit simpler because at least that's through the voter registration system, not being, given that they're a citizen, for example, right? So now we're just changing the programming to say we're going to allow 16-year-olds to vote in this election, but that would take a little bit of programming to do to create that. We'd have to have a separate ballot type, like I said, if they're only allowed to vote on a school board race, for example.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to mention one last question here, but maybe invite you to send us the information that we could put out in an article. And we're very concerned about volunteer training with, those to help with the election process. How is it done? What is best? And just your thoughts on that. So that's another thought about something you could send us. And I am very grateful that you stayed way over time. And like I said, it was worth blowing up the agenda for you. And we really want to have you back. And again, really pledge to work with you on spreading the word about the work of the coalition and helping you get some media attention, because we can do that.
Oh, awesome. That sounds great then. Well, thanks again. Thanks again for having me. And like I said, it's so heartwarming to see the familiar names from San Luis Obispo. So great to be here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Thank you very much.
Great.
Okay, folks, I'm going to, again, apologies that I've blown up the agenda. I'm going to just truncate and eliminate a whole bunch of my remarks. I was going to comment on some of the input we had at a fabulous interleague meeting during the convention, but I'm going to just drop all that. So the important thing right now is to hear from all of you today, and we're going to work on a more structured format for outreach to our locals. And what we're going to try to do now is actually call on you live, recognize you, and unmute you. And Marie, Ann, and Sherry will help me with this, and we'll see how this works. If you could just state your local league, and then try to limit it to about 2 minutes. And before we begin that, I'm going to give Kathleen Cha, who is on the call, is going to say just a few words about the study. And then I'm going to take a quick point of privilege and acknowledge that Jean Perry is on this call. And I hope you can see her face now. Jean is leading up a new effort to rejuvenate our Observer Corps for League Bay Area. So if you are interested, again, you can reach us anytime, LWVBayArea@gmail.com. And again, direct your comment to Jean. And you'll hear more about this later. And we are very excited and grateful to Jean for starting this. And now, Kathleen, apologies for cutting into your time, but we do want to hear a few quick words from you about the status of our study. Go right ahead, Kathleen.
She wanted me, we were going to do about 10 minutes. Now let's see what I can do. A lot shorter than that. Why this regional study? What's so important about that? And it really goes to the role of our Bay Area League. You know, we were founded back in 1960s, and why we were founded at that time as an inter-league organization was, and this was because everyone got together and realized that issues and what we were involved in cross-county barriers, and regional government at that time was really emerging. And really what was needed was a body to monitor what that regional government was, the impact it had on our local communities, and the very fact that, you know, the league nationally, California, whatever, could make all kinds of positions, but because of the regional government and structure and planning, land use involvement, and all the way across cutting issues, that a body was needed to not only monitor it, to be able to examine, look at it, and educate our members about it and the impact it has on local communities. That's my quick way of saying why, when we looked at, and last year we determined that we needed to do a study, 2-year study, looking at the current positions the Bay Area League had that were done in 2000. Too many changes had come up in terms of regional government, regional structure, how they were doing it, what was happening, and the issues that have emerged is no longer, you know, and when I say regional bodies, I'm not just talking ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments, MTC, Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I'm talking water quality control. I'm talking air quality. That we have an incredible array of regulatory agencies that are impacting the issues. Now, what we're doing right off, and I have an incredible team that is working. And I want to give you the names of the team. It is really helpful to have that kind of, you know, we keep talking about this team, but we are talking about, for example, Phyllis White, forgive me, Phyllis, Ian Rowe from Oakland, Roma is sitting on it, Nita Flores, Madeline Cronenberg, Rena Ilari, Karen McLennan, who just stepped back though, because of just some other qualities, but had already contributed enough, Louise Rothman-Reamer, Marianne Shovlin, and then Sherry Thomas comes in and out, Julie Pollitt out of South County, new member to it is Yolanda Schoenboom out of Napa, and then we have another person stepping forward from San Francisco. You'll notice the geographic diversity that we have there. And the reason we have that is if we're looking at the regional agencies and looking at positions and what we want to bring before you, then we want to make sure that we have insight also our county needs, our local needs are sometimes very different from section to section. Now, what are we doing? We've already been looking at cross-section. We've already noticed the cross-sections of transparency, accountability, and outreach. These are rather critical issues that we were already noticing. And the interconnection or lack thereof when decision-making is going on. We're looking at the barriers that are happening into equity and the fact that media's populations are not being served equally based on some decision-making, not necessarily intentionally, but it is happening. The metrics used to evaluate what they're doing is absent in many cases. And that means it becomes very hard to see what is the impact or what is the representation of the target population, how people are chosen to lead some of these agencies and what the equity of that is. this is just a few of the things we've been doing. We're looking currently at 27 Bay Area regional organizations. And that's, we will end up with it in a directory for you that we will make available to all our members, a directory which will include all of the agencies and a one-page summary of who, what, where they are, what they do, reports, etc. Something that'll be kind of a good Bible, if you will, for you to be able to access regional agencies. We will also do some briefings on the big issues that we have been looking at with these regional agencies: housing affordability, homelessness, transportation, sustainability and resilience, climate change, environmental justice, economic justice, equity, effective government, public safety, public health, and we are busy. So how is that for, and it's, we will have this kit for you that will come out probably most likely around May, April or May. And by kit, it will be a kit with not only the new positions we're recommending, but briefings and other kinds of things so that you can look at that. And then come 2024 convention, which will happen in June. And we would like to hope in person, where we will look at all these and have hopefully come to consensus about these positions, but you will have your opportunity to weigh in on it. And that is my quickest way I can do that.
Thanks, Kathleen. That was actually quite amazing. And I am going to truncate basically all my remarks because this is a listening session. Just to give you an idea, we're really wondering, most particularly, what do you need from League Bay Area to support your efforts? Educational sessions, communications expertise, all of that kind of good stuff. And I would encourage you, since we're going to run out of time, just to enter comments into chat, because we're going to capture the chat and read it. Also, feel free to actually send something. Let me give our email address again. We read that every single day. LWV Bay Area, all one word, LWVBA Area @gmail.com. So feel free to send comments, follow up to this, and we're going to combine it with what we heard at convention. Talk about your issues for emphasis, what pops out to you, topics for programs, speakers, all that kind of good stuff. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. We'll acknowledge you. Again, reactions at the icon at the very bottom of your screen on the right. And I'll ask Marianne and Sherry to help me. I'm going to check right now and see if I've got a raised hand. Good heavens, somebody raise your hand, please. Huh. I don't see a single raised hand. Am I looking right? Marianne, do you see anything?
No, I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, maybe we wore everybody out. We already have some things planned, and you're looking at Marie Ann Shovlin. She's working with number one of our board members, Rena Laurie, who are exploring developing a series on various aspects of healthcare. We're really excited about that. And we launched a series with Senator Becker, who covers part of San Mateo and parts of Santa Clara County, as sort of a get acquainted with your Bay Area elected officials. We're really interested in knowing if you would like to hear more from elected officials. We don't deal with state legislation. I'm sure you all know that is the purview of the state league through its legislation committee. However, it doesn't mean we can't do educational programs. And I see an email from Sherry telling me to go ahead and talk. Okay, Sherry. Sherry Smith is a past president of League Bay Area and very active member of Berkeley, Albany, and Emeryville. And what I will say is there is a very interesting topic coming forward. The Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, lovingly referred to as BAFA, is newly formed, has 5 pilot programs underway, and will be examining a bond measure. a regional measure. We at League are going to be following this closely, and we want to contact you well in advance of any vote. We want to educate you on what BAFA is doing as part of MTCA bag. And also when we actually know what the ballot language is and what type of bond measure it might be, when we get specifics, we have already contacted the head of BAFA to come in and make comments for us. And I'm going to check chat, and I still don't see any raised hands. What I would comment further on is just to stress how important Kathleen's work is leading this study as part of and sort of tangential with the study is identifying, again, observers. There are 27 transit agencies, Metropolitan Transportation Commission / Association of Bay Area Governments, which is all one merged entity now, has, I can't even count how many committees. So Kathleen, if you know, enter it into chat, but it's an extensive list. So it's a challenge to watch all of this, and it's an even bigger challenge to know what your priorities as local leagues are. And we do strive very hard to achieve a geographic diversity on our board. And it is a challenge. As soon as we think we're looking good, somebody drops. And then we realize we're weak in another area. If you're interested in board membership, a nominating committee will be formed very soon to look forward to the next 2-year term for board members. That'll come up in 2024. And Kathleen, I think they've heard enough from me. So I'm going to ask if you, as incoming president, will step forward and make some concluding remarks for us and talk about some of the things we're thinking about for next year.
Thank you, Roma. And before I do that, though, I would like for all of you to really recognize and acclaim Roma Dawson for her work. Incredible. She has done an incredible amount this past year. And in not only in just looking at structure, but in terms of reaching out and getting the messages out and advocacy and everything from housing to just the whole literally process and what have you. So it has been, we have been working together kind of, and not so much as co-president, but working back and forth, knowing this is, we were piggybacking to each other. But also would like to make recognition because they do operate behind of our board members. You saw Marie Ann, you Jean Perry, you have, and then you've got Leslie Stewart, who's been doing our treasurer, and she, after many years, is finally taking her time off for good behavior, but she is there helping to kind of, if you will, keep the ball rolling. And then you have, you know, Sherry Thomas, you have Madeline Cronenberg, you have Edith Flores, we have Eric Ahrens, who's out.
Hi, Diane.
Pardon? And then we have, by the way, I forgot to mention on my study is Julie Pollitt, who is an incredible resource for the regional study. And besides Louise and what have you. And then I'm making sure that I'm seeing everybody here that I wanted to give recognition to. And may I say recognition to someone who's been an incredible observer is Kevin Ma. He is on this call. He has done some looking at some of the agencies. And let me give a shout out to someone who is an emeritus, if you will, who is Linda Craig, who's on this call, who has been one of the founding and one of the incredible voices in terms of regional government, land use planning, and more. Now, with all of that, what are we going to be doing? We're moving forward. You've heard already what Roma has been talking about. We are really looking forward to having some series of educational and advocacy meetings throughout the year. You're going to hear a lot from us. I think on a monthly basis, you'll be seeing something that will do it. But we want to make sure, though, that they are also meeting your needs. So that is why it was interesting just to hear from you. What are your priorities? What do you need? What are some challenges? And for that reason, we are going to institute some regular conversations that are just on, all right, I'm a league leader, league member, and how do we administer, what kind of support do you need to make your regular, your league community work? And we wanted to be able to share whatever some resources and things like that. So you'll watch for those kinds of meetings. We will do all of these things by Zoom, but we are going to look at setting up some hybrid meetings where we can get together throughout the year, and look to your biennial convention in 24 to be a hybrid meeting in person and on Zoom. We are really, 2024 is going to be an interesting year, you know, with the elections, but also there are the whole budget proceedings that are going on in the state and the trickle down effect it's having on our regional agency, as well as our local communities and the services that they provide. So this is something we're going to try to stay on top of and share information and educate and empower you. How's that for a good way of saying it's going to be fun?
Yeah. Thank you, Kathleen. And I think you can see why we're all very excited to have Kathleen become president next year. And she has an extensive background in her professional life in working on regional government. And I'll add quickly, since we've got a couple of minutes, because I've had comments from many of you about, are we paying attention to the fiscal cliff that all of our regional, our transit agencies in the Bay Area are having? And I've actually been specifically asked to advocate. And I want to point out that when it comes to the state budget, we may not, as a Bay Area League, advocate on something on behalf of on any legislation without the permission of the state. That is the way League works in its vertical areas. What we did do, and I'll give you an example of AB 1319. This is a bill from Assembly Member Buffy Wicks, who chairs the Assembly Housing Committee. And this relates again to what I mentioned earlier, the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. This was just technical language to clean up the bill. We asked the state as an ILO, please look at this bill, because it had very important changes that those of us that work in affordable housing and homelessness felt were important to address homelessness. It incorporated some more recent best practices, and then it was essentially technical cleanup. And I am happy to tell you that the state said, yes, we will, allowed me to write up the legislation and submit it. They approved it, and they have followed through to right now, and that bill is now in the Assembly. And Kathleen, I see your hand go up, and I give you the last word.
Well, no, I just wanted to add something. Have you noticed, everyone, there is a move in the legislature. It's already passed the Assembly for a constitutional amendment in California saying that housing is a human right. And so it'll be interesting. They think it may just pass out, and it will then go to us as voters in the 2024 election about housing is a human right. And interesting to add to that. They're trying, it looks like they're trying to, in a sense, put it down, because language has power. They're trying to at least getting it, written into our Constitution, however it turns out. But
we'll look forward to more educational programming on that one, because that is really how the solutions for homelessness, quite frankly, I don't know, would love to hear from all of you about your local areas. It is the hot topic in Santa Clara County. I believe in San Mateo. I'm looking at Jean to see if she's going to nod her head. So anyway, this is a prime example. So send us those emails. And now I'm going to say good night, especially thank all my board members that came today, and especially thank longtime leaguers like Sherry Smith. And I wish this could have been in person, Sherry. We never got an in-person meeting for her entire presidency, folks, but we love her and we miss her. So I want to say goodbye to everybody and I'll sign off now. I see people dropping off. I'm going to hang around just a minute.